You can feel it, can't you? Something about the next 2 years just feels off. It isn't the kind of crash everyone is shouting about on the news. It isn't a single dramatic headline you can point to. It's quieter than that, and that's exactly what makes it dangerous. Because the biggest financial shifts in history never announced themselves. They arrived on a schedule that almost nobody was watching, and almost every line on that schedule points to the same window, 2027. My name is Marcos, and I've spent years studying the moments right before the ground moves. I study the quiet patterns that show up long before everyone else notices them. Most finance channels will hand you a scary headline and a thumbnail with a giant red arrow. I'm not interested in scaring you. I'm interested in showing you the math that's hiding in plain sight. I promise to give you the pattern, not the panic. Because once you see the calendar the way big money sees it, you can't unsee it. If you want to understand what's really building underneath the next 2 years, stay with me until the end of the video. This one is going to change how you read every headline from now on. Here's what I mean when I say something feels off. For years, the economy has been running on borrowed time, and I mean that literally. Trillions of dollars in debt were locked in when money was practically free. Cheap loans for companies, cheap mortgages on entire office towers, cheap money for governments themselves. And all of that cheap money came with an expiration date. Think of it like a credit card with a teaser rate that's about to end. The balance was always there, but the real cost was simply postponed. And expiration dates don't negotiate. Most of those loans were never designed to be paid off. They were designed to be refinanced, rolled into a new loan when the old one came due. It's a little like a game of musical chairs that everyone assumed would never stop. That system works beautifully as long as the new loan is just as cheap as the old one. But it isn't. The people who built this never expected to repay it at today's prices. They were quietly betting the cheap era would last forever. It didn't. Rates today are several times higher than when this debt was first created. So when these loans come due, they don't simply disappear. They reset at a price almost nobody planned for. And here's the part most people completely miss. A huge share of that debt comes due in a tight window between now and 2027. Analysts quietly call this a maturity wall. It's a wall the economy is walking toward at full speed. And unlike a real wall, this one is built out of dates, not bricks. You won't see a wall like that on the evening news because walls don't move. They just wait. And the closer we get, the harder it becomes to pretend it isn't there. But here's the part that most people completely miss, and it might be the most important idea in this entire video. Let's start with the numbers, because numbers don't have an opinion. Picture a company, and let's call its owner Sarah. Back in 2021, Sarah's company borrowed $10 million at around 3% interest. That was roughly $300,000 a year to service the debt, completely manageable. Now that loan is maturing, and to keep operating, Sarah has to refinance it. Except the new rate isn't 3% anymore, it's closer to 8%. Suddenly, that same $10 million loan costs about $800,000 a year. Her debt didn't grow, but her interest bill nearly tripled overnight. Now multiply Sarah by thousands of companies. Multiply it by owners of office buildings that have sat half-empty for years. Multiply it by entire industries that only made sense when borrowing was free. The Federal Reserve and major banks have flagged this risk directly. A massive concentration of corporate and commercial real estate debt matures through 2025, 2026, and into 2027. And much of it rests on assumptions that simply no longer exist. Banks know this, which is why they've quietly set aside billions for losses they already see coming. Tenants are renegotiating their leases or walking away entirely. Some towers bought for hundreds of millions now sell for a fraction of that. And every one of those deals was financed with debt that still has to be repaid, often by the same regional banks where you keep your own money. Now you start to see why this is bigger than one industry. It's a chain, and 2027 is where several links pull tight at the same time. Here's something that might genuinely surprise you. The danger isn't that all these borrowers go bankrupt at the same time. The real danger is slower and far sneakier than that. When refinancing gets this expensive, companies quietly stop doing other things. They stop hiring, they freeze expansion, they cut the very projects that would have created new jobs. The pain doesn't arrive as a single explosion, it arrives as a slow tightening, a year where everything just feels harder. The math here isn't complicated, and that's the scary part. Anyone with a calculator and a calendar can see it coming. That's the texture of 2027 the math keeps pointing to. The numbers don't care about optimism. They only care about when the next payment is due. Not a bang, but a squeeze. Now let's talk about why almost nobody is preparing for this. Because the information isn't secret, it's published, sitting in plain reports. So why does it stay invisible? The answer lives in your brain, not in the data. Your brain treats a slow danger and a fake danger almost the same way. It quietly files both under not right now. Psychologists call it normalcy bias. It's the deep assumption that because things have been fine, they'll keep being fine. Your mind is wired to expect tomorrow to look exactly like today. It's the same instinct that keeps people seated a few seconds too long when an alarm goes off. Most of the time that instinct is right, the alarm usually is nothing. But finance is one of the few places where staying calm at the wrong moment is expensive. Think about how you actually react to a chart that's been climbing for years. You don't think this could reverse. You think this is just how things work now. Before a shift, every warning sounds like noise. After a shift, every warning sounds painfully obvious. The signals never change, only your ability to hear them does. And here's where most people mess this up, and I see it constantly. They wait for permission to take something seriously. They wait for the headline, the crash, the official announcement. But by the time the announcement arrives, the cheap move is already gone. The people who navigate these moments well aren't smarter than you. They simply chose to look at the calendar before the calendar forced them to. Here's a question I want you to sit with for a second. When was the last time you changed a money decision because of something you read, not something you felt? For most people, the honest answer is almost never. We move on emotion, and emotion always arrives late. That delay is the gap the prepared quietly step into. Awareness is cheap right now, but it gets expensive fast. By the time worry is everywhere, the easy options have already quietly closed. Now here's the part that goes against your instincts. When something feels off, your gut screams at you to do something dramatic. Sell everything, go to cash, make the bold, decisive move. But history is brutal on dramatic moves made out of fear. Let me show you two people walking into the same uncertain window. The first one, call him David, feels the unease and reacts. He pulls everything out and sits in cash, waiting for the crash that will prove him right. The second one, call her Elena, feels the exact same unease, but instead of reacting, she prepares. She doesn't try to predict the exact day. She just makes sure she won't be forced to sell at the worst possible moment. She keeps enough cash to sleep at night and keeps the rest working. Now fast forward 2 years. The rough patch arrives, exactly as both of them feared. But David has been sitting in cash the whole time, watching from the sidelines. He missed the boring grind upward that happened anyway. Elena rode through the noise, and when prices wobbled, she wasn't a forced seller. She was a calm buyer. Let me give you a number that puts this in perspective. Studies of long-term investors found that missing just the 10 best days over 2 decades can cut your final result roughly in half. And here's the cruel twist. Those best days almost always happen right next to the worst ones, in the middle of the fear. David, waiting in cash for certainty, is the most likely person to miss them. The lesson isn't to ignore the risk. The lesson is don't let the fear of the risk make the decision for you. Notice what actually separated David and Elena. It wasn't intelligence, and it wasn't a secret forecast. It was the difference between reacting and preparing. Reacting feels powerful in the moment and usually costs you later. Preparing feels boring in the moment and usually pays you later. Almost everything that matters in money lives inside that single trade-off, and time in the market quietly beats timing the market again and again. The hard part isn't knowing that, it's living it when your hands are shaking. Now let me show you why this pattern is worth respecting. Go back to 2006. On the surface, everything looked completely fine. Markets were near highs, people felt rich, the mood was confident, but underneath, a wall was already forming. Adjustable mortgages were set to reset at higher rates on a fixed schedule. That schedule was public, you could have read it. Almost nobody did because in 2006 it all felt like noise. By 2008, that quiet schedule had a name everyone suddenly knew. Now go back further to the late 1990s. The internet was real, the excitement was real, but the math was completely detached from reality. Anyone could see the numbers, but very few wanted to. The pattern repeats because the cause is human, not technical. Each of these eras felt completely different while it was happening. Different technology, different headlines, different villains. But strip away the surface and the skeleton is identical. Borrow cheaply, promise loudly, and forget the due date. The calendar always remembers, even when we don't. That's why I keep coming back to the schedule instead of the noise. Cheap money creates promises. Those promises come due on a calendar. And when the bill arrives at a worse price than expected, the whole system strains. And this is where the math starts getting really interesting. Today's version isn't subprime mortgages, it's the maturity wall, corporate and commercial debt resetting into a high-rate world, and all of it is clustered in the same narrow window, at a government paying more in interest on its debt than it spends on its own military, at an entire generation of investors who never knew a world where money cost something. None of these on its own is a catastrophe, but they all come due around the same time, and that overlap is exactly why 2027 keeps lighting up. History doesn't repeat, but it absolutely rhymes, and right now the rhythm is getting loud. In 2006, the warning was a stack of mortgage reset dates. In 1999, it was valuations no business could ever justify. In 2027, it's the bill for a decade of nearly free money. You don't need a crystal ball when you already have a due date. And right now, the due dates are stacking up faster than the headlines admit. So what do you actually do with all of this? Here's the shift that matters, and it isn't a stock tip. It's a change in who you become when you start watching the world this way. Most people are passengers in the economy. Things happen to them and they only react after the fact. But the moment you read the calendar instead of the headlines, you stop being a passenger. You become the kind of person who sees the wall while there's still time to steer. You stop asking, is the crash coming? You start asking, am I positioned so I don't have to care exactly when it comes? That's a completely different way to carry money and to carry stress. The person who understands the maturity wall doesn't panic when the headlines finally catch up. They've already done their quiet preparation. They sleep better, not because they predicted the future, but because they stopped needing to. And that calm becomes its own kind of advantage, the rarest one in finance. This was never about becoming paranoid or living in fear. It's about trading anxiety for awareness. Awareness is lighter to carry, and it actually protects you. Fear makes you freeze, but awareness lets you move while there's still room to move. That single shift from reacting to preparing can quietly change your entire financial life. So go back to that feeling from the very beginning, that sense that something about the next 2 years is just off. That feeling isn't paranoia. I'm not asking you to panic and I'm not asking you to celebrate. I'm asking you to look clearly and early while looking is still free. It's your instincts picking up a pattern your conscious mind hasn't named yet. 2027 isn't a prophecy, and I can't tell you the exact day anything happens. But the calendar is real, the maturity wall is real, the clustering is real. The people who quietly prepare will look in hindsight like they saw the future, when really they just looked at the schedule early. You don't need to predict the storm. You just need to stop standing in the open field pretending the sky is clear. The sky doesn't ask permission before it changes. Start today by looking at where your money actually sits. Ask whether you'd be forced to sell at the worst moment or free to stay calm, because the person you become while preparing is worth far more than being right about any single year. Most people will hear this and do nothing until it becomes a headline. Be the rare one who looked early, because early is the only time looking is ever cheap. If this changed how you see the next 2 years, watch this video to understand the retirement system. I'll see you there.